to talk today about faith. Nothing unexpected there. This is a church, of course we're going to talk about faith. But I'm going to talk about faith in the specific context of how we react to science. And that can be something a little more tricky. In our culture, I think, there is the kind of feeling that you can't be a Christian and a scientist. At any rate, that's the feeling I got when I was a teenager growing up. So if you find it difficult to think about them together, then I know where you're coming from, because I felt like that too. I thought growing up that you had to make a choice. You could be a scientist or you could be a Christian, but you couldn't be both. And it wasn't a hard choice for me because I loved science. I loved the way science showed us stars and galaxies, the universe. Yeah, I grew up on Star Trek. Whereas faith, I thought faith, well, Christianity specifically, I thought it was all about rules, about how to behave, about morality. And I really wasn't that interested. So for me, it really wasn't a difficult choice. Science is great, rules are boring, I'm choosing science, so I'll be an atheist. That was my background. And the science worked out really well. Let me introduce myself. I'm Chris Stone. I'm a professor of astrophysics in Durham. I study black holes using telescopes based on satellites in space. So I'm a rocket scientist, and actually, I find that very surprising. I grew up in a family where there was no history of high-powered jobs. My sister was the first person in our family to go to university. It's amazing that we've had the opportunities we've had. The atheism didn't work out quite so well. I'll tell you that story as we go along. But becoming a Christian was the most surprising thing that ever happened to me, even more surprising than the job I now have. So I'll give you a heads up. If you take nothing else from this talk, take away the fact that you can be a Christian and a scientist, a real Christian and a real scientist at the same time, because I am both. So with that as the background, where does that conflict idea come from? I mean, we've all seen those natural history programs. The beauty, both of the physical universe, stars, planets, galaxies, an immensity of space and time, and the living world, anything narrated by David Attenborough with seals and penguins. Just the diversity and interconnectedness of life across our planet. And I think the most common reaction to both of these is just a sense of wonder and of awe. I'm going to focus on the physical universe because that's what I know about. I'm a physicist. And with the physical universe, our increased understanding with science has just dramatically increased our appreciation of the size, just the immensity of the universe we live in. The Earth seems quite big, but it's tiny compared to the Sun. And then the Sun seems quite big, but it's tiny compared to the other 100,000 million stars that make up our galaxy, tied together by their own gravity into this beautiful spiral disk. And our galaxy seems big. After all, even travelling at the speed of light, the fastest there is, it would take you 100,000 years to get from one side to the other. But there's 100,000 million other galaxies flung out into space across unimaginable distances and times. So, the more we know from science about our universe, the bigger it is. And also the more beautiful it is. Those images from the Hubble Space Telescope, the more beauty we see, the more we look. And so for me, as a Christian, that just makes the God who made it all bigger and even more beautiful. So looked at in this way, science shows us that God is bigger than we'd have ever thought just by looking. Science is showing us the immensity of the universe, and so points to how much bigger is the God who made it all. So what's the problem with science and faith? Precisely, what problem? But when I was growing up, I thought there was a problem with science and faith because I'd picked up the narrative. The Big Bang happened, so we have a sort of explanation for how the universe started, so we don't need God to start it, so there isn't a God. Let's look at that in a bit more detail. Obviously, as a Christian now, I disagree with the conclusion, so something has gone wrong in the previous bit of the sentence. And there's an extreme viewpoint that puts the problem in the first clause, in the Big Bang happened, and challenges that. But really, there's a lot of evidence for the Big Bang happening. And besides, as a Christian, the Big Bang, what's not to love? It's not there's some sort of explosion of matter into pre-existing space and time, because space and time is something. Actually, even empty space isn't empty, but let's not go there. It's space and time and matter and energy all coming and expanding together with the physical laws imprinted on the fabric on such a way that they've allowed stars and galaxies and planets and life to form. Okay, so we like the Big Bang. Where next then? So I think then the more kind of prevalent view is that, yeah, the Big Bang happened, but surely it needed God to start it all off, because science doesn't really have a mechanism for how to make the Big Bang, how to make a universe out of nothing. Well, we do have some ideas, but yeah, they're speculative, and we don't really have a good picture of that. So then, should we just say, well, we need a God to start it off? But I'm not really very keen on this approach because I think it relegates God to the sort of gaps in our knowledge. It says we don't need God for the stuff we do understand. We only need God for the stuff we don't understand. But then as our knowledge increases, the spaces where we've put God, these gaps, they get smaller. And so then science seems like a bit of a threat to faith. As science grows, the space for God gets smaller. But surely that's backwards. Didn't we just say that the more we know, the bigger our sense of wonder and awe at the God who made it all? Okay. So if I'm not going for either of those, what do I think? I think it's in the last bit. We don't need a God to start it, hence there is no God. I'm sorry, that hence doesn't follow. I don't believe in God because I need him to start the universe. I believe in God because of Jesus. And this was the most surprising thing that ever happened to me. So let me tell you what happened. I was 17, doing A-levels, and a school friend had become a Christian and invited me to her church. I had never seen anything like her church. I'd only seen quite traditional churches where people looked a bit embarrassed by being there. Whereas this church, it was a church where people were worshipping God like they really believed it. And I had a strange experience, which I would now describe as encountering Jesus, where it seemed that he was just behind me going, so, I don't exist, do I? And I'm going, no. That didn't make me believe in God. We interpret our experiences through our beliefs. So to me as an atheist, that just showed me that religion has a very powerful psychological hold over us, and I'm just as psychologically dodgy as the rest of humanity. But to make myself feel better, I took on the pastor after the service and told him why faith was such a bad idea. But he then asked me what I now recognise as the classic question. So, who do you think Jesus was then? And I said, good teacher, which I now recognise is the classic bad answer. Now, clearly, Jesus was an amazing teacher. His sayings, love your neighbour, ooh, that's hard. Love your enemies, forgive those who wrong you, what? And he didn't just say these things. Saying these things is hard enough. He lived them out. Okay, so that's quite surprising. But the key issue for me was that he allowed people to worship him as God. Don't know about you, but if someone comes along saying that they're God, I think they're a nutter. But Jesus doesn't come across as a nutter, someone who thinks he's God but isn't. So what did he think he was doing? Allowing people to worship him, especially in the culture he grew up in, where it was completely forbidden to even think or contemplate worshipping anything other than God. I mean, maybe he wasn't mad, he knew who he was, so he knew he wasn't God, but allowed people to worship him for the ego trip it gave him. That doesn't play well with the sort of character that you read about him. Or maybe he let people worship him because somehow it might make them feel better. In his culture, it's incredibly forbidden to even think of worshipping anything other than God in a Jewish culture. Which doesn't leave many options, apart from maybe he was God, and so he knew he was God, and worshipping him was the right response. I had never thought of that before. And I'd never had anybody talk to me about the evidence for faith before. And the more I looked at the evidence for Jesus being the Son of God, the more I became convinced by it. I'm a scientist, and scientists weigh evidence. Weighing evidence is why I'm convinced that the Big Bang happened. The more I look, the more evidence there is. And the more I looked at Jesus, the more evidence there was, not just for his life, but for his death, and most surprisingly, for his resurrection, because people don't get up from being dead, unless they're God. And if you want to know more about the evidence, I'd really encourage you to do an Alpha course to explore all of this a bit further, because there's a lot of evidence. And if I went through it, I'd way overrun my timescale, and Alan would come after me with a very big stick. So, in the end, by weighing the evidence, I came to the conclusion that the best explanation for what I saw in Jesus was that he was who he said he was, the Son of God. In which case, there's a God, and I was wrong, which is quite a terrible thing to admit when you're 17. Romans 10, verse 9 says, "If you declare with your mouth that Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved." Biblically, this is the test of Christianity. This is the test of Christian faith. It's not what we believe about Genesis. It's not what we believe about Revelation or any of the difficult and controversial bits of the Bible in between. It's about what we believe when we look at Jesus. It's about how we stand in relation to Jesus. So let's wrap it up. Science is great. It shows us just more and more of the beauty and immensity of the universe that we live in. So it shows us more and more of the beauty and immensity of God. But it's all made by and for Jesus. So let's make the main thing the main thing. Whatever interpretations we put on Genesis, Revelation, anything in the Bible in between, the main thing is Jesus. So let's worship him.